Hey there folks, welcome back to part 4 of my snakehead seminar that I gave out at Island Tackle Outfitters. And again, I highly recommend you go out there. The place is a hidden gem. Never knew about it. Long as I've lived here and driven past it, never known about it. And excellent gear, great staff, very informative and very helpful. So today's episode covers really the discussion about can Northern Snakehead become a game fish for Maryland? And there's many points, many reasons why they make an excellent game fish, but there's also reasons why it's prudent to have some caution at this point, especially in terms of them being introduced into new areas. So I won't go into all those reasons here because we get into a lot of them in the video. So let's get straight to the video.
Snakehead, I've been releasing mine lately, but they taste great. The meat is very firm, and they have a low, mercury content. That's what PCBs are. There's a thing called bioaccumulation, and that's where, as you move up levels in the food chain, any environmental pollutants tend to accumulate more and more in those higher level species because they're eating, you have a bluegill who eats 10 minnows. He takes all the pollutants from those 10 minnows into his body. Then you have whatever it be, a bass who eats that. He eats 10 bluegill. He takes all of those pollutants. Then you have a bird of prey. By the time you get up into the higher echelons of the food chain, you have a lot of built up toxins. Not the case, at least nowhere near as much with snakehead. Very safe fish to eat.
Along those same lines, have you noticed many of the fish you caught having worms?
I would say probably about 10%. It depends on where I am. I would maybe say as high as 20, but I think it's probably closer to 10 in my experience. And with most of those worms, and again, I'm going to defer to Jim here because he's trained in this area. But I've read that as long as the meat is fully cooked, that the smaller worms aren't really much of an issue. Is that about right?
Right, yeah, and it seems like too that some areas have more worms than other areas.
Exactly.
Yeah, some rivers, they seem like what you're saying, might be at 50%, and then some of the other rivers at 5%, like you said.
I see more worms than black, or they seem to favor that really muddy bottom. So.
Mm-hmm.
Wait, I had the same question about parasites.
Okay.
So basically, you're just saying it's extra protein.
Well, you probably want to cut around it, but if you cook it, it's, you're not going to die, unless you eat it raw. So.
The reason I asked was me and a couple buddies, we caught 4 of them in the Tucson a couple weeks ago. They didn't want them, they gave them to me. I filleted them all, and 3 out of the 4 had these black, looked almost like watermelon seeds. And I cut those open, and there's a long string of worms inside.
A lot of times you can see it in the scaling itself. You'll see little pepper spots, and that's a good sign that you might have them in that fish. A lot of times if you look at the fish, and a lot of times if you take the flat and hold up to the light and look at it in the light, you'll be able to see for something.
Yeah, that's exactly what I did.
Yeah,
and
hold
I
up
cut
to the
around
light
them.
and look, and then you see them and just cut them out. If it's a lot of them, then maybe not eat it.
Now, the Patuxent in particular has a lot of water treatment plants that empty into it. So I would venture a guess that those areas of lower water quality as a cause of pollution, like a lot of outflow from water treatment plants, you probably have a higher incidence of those worms. Any other questions?
I got a question. So, do they, as far as them interacting with bass, largemouth, do they predate on bass even after, even when they're larger? Like if they were matched up size, a good, 3-pound bass, a 3-pound snake, would they go after the bass? Or, I know they eat their young and stuff like
exactly.
that. They both of them do it.
My best answer I can have for you is not to my knowledge. Now, looking at the studies of bass, if you check out, there's a series I did on YouTube called Northern Snakehead Truth. And that's why I interviewed John Odenkirk, who's with the Virginia Department of Game and Fisheries. And that's where we go over all of the, I don't know all, but most of the findings from the 2018 International Snakehead Symposium. And one of the key points I focused on there, one of the biggest things that was a concern for a lot of fishermen, I grew up being a bass fisherman too. One of the biggest concerns was what impact is snakehead going to have on the bass fishery? The studies in the Potomac have shown that bass have either maintained or grown in terms of population after the introduction of snakehead. So, and again, I think it's a good thing, right? That's what we want to see. Now, like I said before, that's the Potomac and its tributaries. That could change in other environments. So one of the main things I want to do with my YouTube channel is to be able to share the science as I come across it. Like I said, I'm kind of in a good position because I work at the American Fishery Society. So when studies are coming through to be published, you know, I'm buddies with the editor at AFS, so I have he'll give me the heads up, like, hey, this study's coming out, you know, and I can try to get the information out, because there's a lot of great work being done by our fisheries biologists, but there seems to be a lot of times a disconnect between fishermen and fisheries biologists, and that's a real shame, because we should be working together to try to manage the resource. So thus far, I mean, they have found bass in the stomach of snakehead, they found snakehead in the stomach of bass, but it hasn't seemed, based on the published science thus far, to have any impact on either species one way or the other. And so yeah, that's the last point I'll make right here is more study is needed. You know, there are other ecosystems that are much different from the Potomac that need to be studied, and there are studies underway.
Are they spawning right now over here?
Some are, yes. Yep, I was talking to a guy who was out there today, and he saw a lot of them. They act funny when they're spawning, man. They act real funny. It's almost, I don't want to go as far as to say it's kind of like courtship behavior, but when they hollow out that nest, you'll see them rubbing on each other a lot of times. You'll see them actually coming out of the water and rubbing on top of one another. It's very interesting behavior. I mean, in some ways, I mean, it's a contentious issue for us because we don't know what the impact is going to be, and they're far into our ecosystems. So we start out at a default position of kind of like you know, like, and it's a snakehead, and it's got big teeth, so it's kind of a scary fish. And you know, the media ramp up didn't really help. But a lot of the aspects of it, like the fact, like how well the parents take care of their fry, is kind of admirable in a way. But I mean, if you don't subscribe to that notion, that's also a great way to target them. Because when they're on their fry balls, if you throw like a hollow body lure on top of their fry ball, good chance it's going to get smashed.
Do you know how like bass get like red tails when they spawn?
Yes.
Does snakehead do the same?
Do
Do they get like different colorations?
You know, honestly, I don't know. You have any experience there?
I didn't hear what you said.
He was asking if like when bass are spawning and they're fanning the bed, you'll get the red marks, the sore spots on their tails. Have you seen that with snakehead at all?
Yeah.
Okay, there you go.
And I think some of the bloody fins also are from the rubbing, from the courtship, from the displaying, that kind of thing. I don't think they so much necessarily fan the eggs, like maybe a largemouth does, like that's how they get the bloody tail.
Yeah.
But I have seen it where they have a bloody tail, but I've never seen them sitting on a nest or doing this. So
Yeah.
I don't know that that's how they get that bloody tail,
Nip at it when they're courting the nip at it.
Yep.
Yep.
They bite each other.
Yep.
You said the studies that have been done, I'm assuming are on the Virginia side of the bay?
The majority of them, I think the answer is yes.
Okay. Is there any study been on frogs and the impact to them? And I'll
think
tell you
so.
why. I have one of the first snakeheads caught in Dorchester County was caught exactly 1 mile from my house in a ditch in a turtle pot, 8 pounds in a ditch. My neighbor has a septic pond, cattails and phragmites all the way around it. It's fairly deep. It's about 7 feet above the road, which is about probably 18 feet above sea level, and it's full of snakeheads. I have a pond 300 feet from him, quarter-acre pond. I have no snakeheads. And the reason I don't have any snakeheads, to me, there's only one reason. When I dug my pond, I lined the whole pond with rocks, and I don't have any herring. The herring won't go to the pond because they can't stand on the rocks without them rolling. I don't have any turtles in my pond for the same reason. Very seldom do I ever have a snake in my pond. My neighbor, every time it rains, he's got snakeheads all over his backyard. Here's the interesting thing about it. I always love this time of year. I've got a sliding glass door in my bedroom, and like last night, I had it open all night long. I had any trouble? None. I mean, there ain't a freaking peep. I've got my pond, his pond. I don't have any because my pond's clear and the bass eat most of it. I have a few. I have a couple in my culverts, in my driveway and stuff. and I'll hear them. I don't hear nothing in his yard. That used to put me to sleep. It was like one of those little cassettes that you put into the nature. Another pond across the road from me that's full of snakeheads, I don't hear a peep. I hunt a place on the Blackwater River, it's a little tributary that cuts over the Blackwater.
Oh yeah, I know.
We have 1.5 miles of road front. We've got 3 miles of shore front. If you follow the shoreline, you can go down there right now, and it's just as quiet as it is in this room. You will not hear a peep. And we have about 150-foot average between us and the river, but we also have a canal that runs about 3/4 of a mile of our property. It's between us and the river. You don't hear nothing. It is dead quiet.
And it's not the first. You're not the first person to tell me that they think there's been an impact on frogs, and it wouldn't surprise me
Impact on
either.
other stuff. It's been dramatic on frogs and wood ducks. Same way.
And more studies need to be done, and that's something that like the gentleman I interviewed was John Odenkirk with the Virginia Department, and that's one thing he says is that, and he admits, like, we have not measured everything. So like in frogs, stuff like that. I mean, I think probably the biggest problem we face, and again, I'm going to rely on you here, Jim. It's hard to measure impact if we don't have baseline measurements prior to introduction of snakehead. So like when you're dealing with something like frogs, that's probably not something that's surveyed too often. So coming in to do the study on frogs, if you don't have a baseline to compare it to, it's really hard to say, yes, this is the impact from snakehead.
And that's something that we need a big focus on Eastern Shore right now. We need to find biologists to get involved with an amphibian study immediately because we have a problem. Water frog, what water frog wise, not beavers, not any kind of land frog.
Waterfowl too.
Yeah,
Waterfowl too,
it's not that the DNR doesn't care, but it's like the DNR is paid for basically with fisheries dollars and stuff. So you got guys that work on straight bass and guys that work on largemouth and guys that work on perch and everything else. And when snakehead came along, it's basically we got to get some data quick.
Yeah.
But it's hard to you got to pull guys off from one project, put them on a different project, and as times you get the data, you got to do long-term trends to get any kind of meaningful data. You got to sample the same spots like in Potomac 10 years or so. And we did some sampling in Blackwater 10 years ago before we really saw too many snakeheads. They're just now getting around to do some post-snakehead data now, and they're finding some really interesting stuff that their sampling is going to wrap up now in May, and it'll take a couple months to a year to collaborate the data, and then you get it published, and then we can share it. But right now, it's looking like it's pretty bleak. We went and shocked snakeheads Wednesday in the Transquakin, and 10 years ago, 8 years ago, they last did the survey. They do 5 sites, and they'd see, in some cases, 10 bass a site. We saw 3 bass at all 5 sites combined. Now, that was just, that's just one day. You can't look at that and say that's a problem. But it takes, years of that to do it. So we are doing it. It just takes a while. There's more data on the Potomac, because that's where Ground Zero was, and that's where more work was done. And then you got collaboration with Virginia and Maryland to do some work there. So it's coming. It's just slow.
Now, folks, as you just heard, we had a lot of great back and forth going on here. And like I've said from the beginning, all the way from when I started the Northern Snakehead Truth Series, my goal is to get the information out there. I have my own personal position, my own personal preference. I'm a huge fan of the species. However, I'm also cognizant of the fact that we need to use the best science available to shape our actions, to shape our fisheries management policies. So as this new information comes out, if it ends up being the case that there is demonstrated impact, rest assured I'm going to pass that on to you. Because eventually we're going to have to do a weighing of the different positives and negatives of this species. Because a lot of other species in our waters, like largemouth bass, for example, are non-native. But I doubt that many people are going to say, yes, let's eliminate largemouth bass to improve the population of, say, sunfish, for example. So it's going to become a very nuanced conversation. And maybe, like in Maryland, for example, we have different areas that we manage differently for trout. Maybe in the future, when it comes to snakehead policy, we can have the same kind of thing. If there's no impact in the Potomac, but if the data shows there is large impact in Blackwater, maybe we can actually have a difference in policy management between those 2 locations. Just food for thought. But like I said before, this kind of back and forth, this dialogue between all the stakeholders, that's going to be crucial and finding the points of compromise and the points that we need to effectively manage northern snakehead. Because as a game fish, they do have tons of potential. They're an incredible species. But we do need to be honest and aware of what the impact is, whatever it happens to be. All right? So, after this one, we have part 5, which will close out this series with some more great back and forth between myself, Jim Thompson, Cass Kenny's in here, and a bunch of other people who are just very interested in the species. So keep an eye out for that. The last part of the series coming up on the day after this episode right here. Questions or comments, let me know. And y'all have a good one.